What was the things that you saw when you went to these blue zones that they did that maybe you weren't even thinking they would do? Like, what were the surprising things they did? Or the unsurprising things they did?
I mean, there were a few things I saw that were kind of striking to me that made sense. But one was that in Ikaria, which was one of the Greek blue zones, they eat so much wild food. So they had wild greens, summer greens, winter greens. They had wild mushrooms. They had wild sage tea. They had wild fish. They had so much wild food in their diet. And we know that wild foods are much more nutrient dense. Why? Because they're stressed. And stressed plants make more protective compounds. Those protective compounds are called phytochemicals. They give the color and the richness and the flavor. What people don't understand is the more flavorful a food is naturally, the more phytochemicals it has.
Interesting.
You know, if you go to your garden at the end of August and pick a cherry tomato that's ripened in the hot sun that explodes in your mouth like the most incredible flavor. But if you go to a store-bought tomato and you cut it, it's like cardboard, tasteless. What's the difference? It's the phytochemicals. So flavor always follows the phytochemical richness of a food. So not the stuff you put on it or sauces or salt or fat or sugar to make it taste better, which food industry does, but just the natural flavor.
Interesting.
So you know, the more flavorful a food is, the better it is. So they eat a lot of wild food, and it's so flavorful. The other thing was interesting was that shepherds, had this culture of going and knowing exactly which plants to feed their animals at which time of year to graze them. So it would shepherd them. They'd eat all these wild plants, but they knew if this herb was coming in at this time of year, they'd go eat this herb. And if this plant was coming in this time of year, they'd go eat that thing. I'm like, why are you doing that? He says, we know because the meat and the milk taste better when we, and so it kind of, they were not doing it because it was better for them or because it was for longevity or because...
Tastes better.
Right, the cheese, it tastes better. So it turns out that we know now that phytochemicals are not just in plants. And phyto means plant. Right? They're not just in plants, they're also in animals. So the work of Fred Provenza and Stephen Van Vliet from Duke have clearly shown that when animals are eating a wide array of wild plants or a wide array of, planted grasses and flowers and different things, they will seek out medicine in the food. So they will literally go and eat major, calorie crops, let's say, but then they'll go and sample from 100 different plants to get their medicines. And so these wild animals, these wild plants are being eaten, and the phytochemicals are accumulating in the meat and the milk of these animals. So studies have shown, for example, that you can have as high levels of the catechins in green tea in goat milk. That's from goats eating certain wild plants. Yeah. So it's mind-blowing, and there may be ways that even these get transmuted. So eating regeneratively raised meat, I went to a restaurant here in LA last night called Matu, where they have regeneratively raised meat.
Was it amazing?
It was amazing. Now, it wasn't as fatty and kind of like marble, corn-fed meat, but it was delicious, and it was tasty and yummy and amazing.
What was this place called?
Matu, M-A-T-U.
I'll have to check it out.
Really good. It's in Beverly Hills. And you'd love it. It's so good. And you can eat that and know you're eating from an animal that's been well taken care of, that's living out in its natural habitat, that's regenerating the environment, that's restoring the ecosystems, increasing biodiversity, conserving water in the soils, that's reducing climate change, that's producing more nutrient-dense food that is rich in phytochemicals and good fats and more antioxidants and more minerals and just pretty much everything. So
that's incredible.
So that was a sort of I think a key to part of their longevity was they lived on this stuff. They basically were shepherds, and goats and sheep were their livelihood.
What was about their relationships?
Yeah.
How did that play in? Did they have certain types of relationships with family members? Did they have intimate relationships? Were they married for long periods of time? Did they have 10 wives? What was the whole? What was the process?
One couple I saw had a collective age of 210.
It's crazy.
So I don't know. I think being married is definitely a key to longevity for men. For women, not always. Depends on if they're happy or not.
Oh, man.
So I think having a happy, healthy relationship is such a key part of longevity. And they were very much in the realm of community. And it wasn't just like this isolated relationship. They were embedded in a context of a community that was totally supportive, that celebrated together, that played together, that worked together, that, harvested together, that shared sheep together, that made cheese together. They were just doing stuff together as part of the way of life. And they would just stop and talk and hang out and like chill. And it was like nobody was like starting a company or nobody was like getting ahead in social media for likes and followers. I mean, they were just living life. They weren't striving or trying to get anywhere. They were just being.
Interesting.
And so their culture was all about the power of these incredible moments where you share with people you love and care about and celebrate life and enjoy life and talk. And we were driving out of this one town in Sardinia because I had these two guides that were really great and they were local Sardinians. And this car like stops in front of us and like blocks us. And this old guy gets out and he walks over this stone wall and he like waves us to come over. And I'm like, what's going on here? And he just waved us over. He wanted to talk. He saw us in the car behind. He's like, he just wanted to talk. So we sat in the stone wall for like an hour or so and chit-chatted about life and about his life. And he was Carmen. He was 85 years old and super vibrant, fit guy. And he started telling us about his life and how there was a mudslide that destroyed the village he grew up in, which they moved the town a little bit higher on the mountain. But he still had his farm on that old area, his old family land. So he took us down. He had like 6 sheep, and he had a pig, and he had some chickens, and he had orchards, and he had a whole garden where he grew eggplants and peppers and tomatoes and zucchini and herbs and spices. And it was amazing. And he literally took care of his entire property by himself at 85 years old. I mean, I don't think I could do it. Right. And then I'm chasing this guy up this hill after his sheep, and I'm like, wow, I can't keep up with this guy. And he's 85 years old. And so he was super vibrant, mentally sharp. He lived with his family, and they just had this incredibly deep culture. There wasn't nursing homes. I met woman Julia, who was 103 months. Come on. Like I say, I'm 5 3/4. She's like, I'm 103 months, and she was like, didn't have kids and lived with her niece and nephew who loved her and took care of her. I mean, she was still working. She was still working, making all this stuff for weddings, all the little tablecloths and doilies and embroidery stuff. I don't know how to do that, but she was making all this stuff, and she was just so bright and still was walking around every day and taking her walks and hanging out with everybody and her friends. And it was really amazing to see this culture where people were not ostracized or excluded, but they were included in life.
And it doesn't sound like they're hustling for something. They're working hard to maintain their life, like their home, their farm, their land, whatever they have. Maybe their small business, but they're not hustling for something greater. Is that right?
Yeah. No.
Why can you live long and still
hustle?
Hustle or just want more, want to build something greater in your life?
I think you can. I think it's really about what happens on the inside, because one of the biggest things that regulates your epigenome is your mind. So your biggest pharmacy in your body is between your ears. It's the most powerful pharmacy in the world. Wow. And you can activate it for good or bad. So when we are having thoughts that are, stressful thoughts, when we're in toxic relationships, when we're worried or anxious, when we aren't in harmony with ourselves, it activates all these really nasty pathways that drive inflammation and harm your mitochondria and your microbiome is listening in on your thoughts, is eavesdropping. So those bugs don't like it when you are not happy.
Really?
Yeah.
What is the process of that, from an idea, a thought, into the mitochondria? How does that transfer into a healthy information, into a physical manifestation versus unhealthy information, data, and a thought into physical unhealthy?
So what's the biochemistry of it? Well, for example, if you're stressed, you're producing cortisol and adrenaline and all these other hormones and proteins that then will trigger a whole cascade of downstream effects that activate transcription factors, that turn on genes that cause inflammation and all these other problems. So you're basically, creating inflammatory thoughts are creating inflammation in your body, literally. And
isn't that crazy?
And you have receptors on your, like immune cells, for example, for neurotransmitters. So if you're stressed, your immune system is eavesdropping on your thoughts.
Wow.
That's why if you're stressed, you are more likely to have an infection or get sick or have other bad health consequences.
Why do you think it is that our body is built this way, that a thought can either make us feel and physically transform into joy and health, or feel sick and then become sick? Why do you think our body?
Why, from an evolutionary point of view?
Why do you think that is? Isn't that crazy?
It's a crazy
You
thought,
think
right?
something, it's not actually. It's in your mind, right? Where it's like, and then it transfers into your body.
Well, I don't know, Lewis, but I think, we have a built-in stress response system, which we needed. Like if
Yes.
we were getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, well, we needed to get on the move.
Right.
And we needed to
Run.
jack up our cortisol and pump our blood sugar up and get our blood pressure up and our heart rate up and flood our body with glucose and, just all this stuff that needs to
survive, yeah.
make, it's like, the story, like how someone's, sees their kid under a car and can lift up a car. Like, why can that happen, right? Because we have the system built in to deal with acute stress. And that's a good thing. The problem is we have a society and a life that drives chronic, unmitigated, unrelenting stress. So unless you are very clear about how to discharge that stress, because we can't avoid it, right? But how do you discharge it? How do you not react? And how do you have a different perception of relationship and what's happening to you?
Yeah.
It's all about perception, right? So I always say stress is the perception of a real or imagined threat to your body. So it could be a real threat to your body, like a tiger chasing you, or it could be an imagined threat to your ego, like you think your wife's cheating on you, but she's not. And you get the same physiology. Or you could have the same input. Let's say you're James Bond, and I put a gun to your head versus Woody Allen. It's going to be a very different set of responses,
Sure.
right? Same input, very different response. So that's the beauty of our minds, is we have the power over our thoughts. You remember Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he said, between stimulus and response, there's a pause. And in that pause lies a choice. And in that choice lies our freedom. For those of you who don't know about Viktor Frankl, he was in Auschwitz, and he was a psychiatrist in Auschwitz, and he chose not to let even the most horrific thing that's almost ever happened to human beings affect his own well-being and happiness and inner life.
Yeah.
That just blows my mind, right?
It's unbelievable.
So when you think, oh, my life, this and that, we always have a choice, and whether you have stuff or don't have stuff, it's all about our perceptions. So mindset and your thoughts are a key part of longevity and health. And having meaning and purpose. That was the other thing in these cultures. They had so much meaning and purpose. Like Carmine had such purpose. He had to go and take care of his sheep, and he had to feed his family, and he wanted to support the other members of the community by giving them food, and he fed his animals the extra. And so he had a meaningful life, and he also had a very active mind, was reading books and learning all the time. So, that extends your life by up to 7 years.
Wow. Having meaning and purpose. Because you hear the story sometimes of someone in their older years, their husband or their wife dies, and then within 6 months or a year later, they die.
Or a week later, yeah.
Or a week later, right? You hear that story often.
All the time.
And is that because their meaning has lost, or just when they have a broken heart and they don't know how to
Both. I mean,
that?
there actually is a phenomena of a broken heart. I had a patient with this once who had this incredible wife. They were deeply in love. They were married for decades and decades. She got breast cancer and died. And he was relatively healthy, and all of a sudden he went into heart failure.
Come on.
Like, boom. And it's in the medical literature. It's literally a broken heart. And it causes actual clinical heart failure, where your heart muscle can't pump the blood around.
Now, that's from, what is that from? Is that from thinking
Yes.
and then feeling the heart, the pain in your heart?
Yeah. It's the physiological phenomena that happen when you have a stress response, the flood of all these stress molecules in your body that damages the heart. And we were able to get him better, but it was through energy healing, which sounds kind of wacky and weird, but it was really through his own, getting back in his body, being touched, being held, being energetically reset.
Wow.
He was able to reverse the heart failure. It wasn't by taking some fancy drug or getting a heart transplant.
So he didn't pass away from that.
No, he didn't.
But some people do.
We fixed it, yeah. But some people do. Right?
They might isolate themselves even more, and then their body just starts to shut down.
Loneliness is the biggest killer.
Really?
Loneliness seems to be a bigger risk factor than smoking or bad food or almost anything else.
What happens when we're lonely?
Again, it's a stress. Like we're social creatures, Lewis. We all are meant to belong. We have a longing to belong, and if you look at it from an evolutionary point of view, you stick a human out in the desert or a forest by himself.
Yeah, they're not going to last long.
Forget it. And so this is not true just of humans, but it's all of creation. And E.O. Wilson, who was a Harvard professor, wrote many, many books. He just died, but he was a very, very thoughtful guy. And he wrote a book called The Social Conquest of the Earth. And it's about how from ants to humans, we all work together, like ant colonies, right? They're all working together. And so we have to work together to survive. And that's why altruism is actually a medicine. Altruism and serving and helping others actually activates healing mechanisms in our body.
Isn't that crazy?
It activates dopamine in the same way that cocaine or heroin does.
Altruism
Yeah.
and serving, giving.
Yeah. We have an extraordinarily sick society. You know, America was 4% of the population of the world now, and is 16% of the cases and deaths for COVID. Why?
So America's 4% of the population
In the world.
Of the world.
But we were 16% of the cases and deaths, 4 times